What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining the Glass Horror Channel, the best horror channel here on YouTube. And I'm very, very excited because right now, today, we are about to get into the newest episode of the history of horror. And finally, we have made it to the 1940s. Let's get started. So we're now in the 1940s in horror. Universal still has its stranglehold on the horror industry. The 1940s got started off very similar to the way the 1930s ended. Again, like I just said, Universal still reigned supreme. Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff were still doing the majority of the acting in the horror industry. For today's episode, we are going to talk about the third entrance, the third of the big three. If it wasn't for him, we could say that Universal movie monsters would not have lasted as long as they did. So, in 1940, the year of 1940, out of 11 horror movies, 5 of them either starred Bela Lugosi or Boris Karloff. So that goes to show that horror was starting to run thin. And Universal could only show Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Mummy in so many different variations. The industry needed new blood. And in 1941, Lon Chaney Jr. burst on the scene. The awesome thing about Lon Chaney Jr. is he is the first second generation horror character or horror icon, following his father, Lon Chaney Sr., who played the Hunchback of Notre Dame, Phantom of the Opera, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So he had solidified back in the early 1900s that you could say he was the very first horror icon, was Lon Chaney Sr. So it only made sense that his son follow in his footsteps. But that wasn't how he started. Lon Chaney Jr. actually started out in westerns. That was his path. But in 1941, he introduced us to the Wolfman, the third part of the trilogy, of the triple threat that was Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. The Wolfman was really cool because Dracula was a full-on villain. It was obvious to see that he was a villain. He enjoyed being a villain, and he wasn't changing for anybody. Frankenstein was a villain, but not intentionally. He didn't ask to be created, and the real villain of his story is Dr. Frankenstein, who created him from dead body parts. So he was a sympathetic villain. Now, even going more so was Lon Chaney and the Wolfman. The cool thing about the Wolfman was you could feel he did not like being the Wolfman. When Lon Chaney Jr., Lawrence Talbot, would change back into a regular human, he was terrified. He would even go as far as to lock himself in jail, not wanting to be let out, because he knew once he's let out, he can cause some damage. And you can see in certain scenes with the Wolfman that, with Lawrence Talbot, he was almost in tears, pleading with whoever will listen to him just to keep away from him, to keep him locked up, to not take their eyes off of him, because when the moon went full, he became a wolf. The Wolfman is groundbreaking because it changed the Universal landscape. No longer did we have to worry about Dracula and Frankenstein only. Now we had a brand new character that you can do multiple sequels with. And the cool thing about Wolfman was it gave rise to 1945's Frankenstein versus Wolfman. And before Freddy versus Jason, before Ali and Frazier, before Mayweather Pacquiao, the versus matchup that everybody wanted to see was something involving Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman. And we got that in 1945 with Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. Now, I mentioned earlier in the 1930s, I mentioned earlier in previous videos, also in this decade, we got House of Dracula and House of Frankenstein. Both of those were movies that had all three villains together: Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. Now, they were not played by the people that made them famous. Bela Lugosi did not play Dracula. Boris Karloff did not play the Wolfman, or the Frankenstein monster. And a side note in that same vein, in Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, Frankenstein's monster was actually played by Bela Lugosi. That's what I was saying before about back in the early 30s and 40s. There wasn't a lot of actors and actresses to go around, so you had to have a lot of different people. You had to have a handful of people play different roles. So all characters at one point played Dracula. All characters at one point played the Wolfman. You know what I mean? So that was kind of what was going on then. But going back to Lon Chaney Jr., he definitely deserves to stand right alongside Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff, because when you think of the originators of horror, when you think of the originators of the monster, Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman are the three mainstays. I personally have been a werewolf for Halloween. I would imagine some of you all have as well. And although the Wolfman was not the first werewolf movie, it was the most important because it got the most prestige. It went the furthest. It had the biggest box office. It got the most prestige. So, based off of the Wolfman, we saw countless werewolf movies. American Werewolf in London, American Werewolf in Paris, The Howling, just to name a few. And that's just not even scratching the surface as what werewolves brought to the horror landscape. So, nice and quick video, guys. We need Lon Chaney Jr. deserve to have his own video, because when in the 1940s landscape, there wasn't a lot going on, but he was by far the biggest. And he also is by far one of the biggest to stand alongside the two others that I just mentioned. So he had to get his own video. I hope you guys like this. If you're new here, smash a like button, because your likes help me to create more content. Subscribe to the channel. I do all things horror. There will be a couple of videos popping up in a few minutes now to tell you what else that I do. But horror reviews, history of horror, trailer reactions, top 10 lists, top 20 lists, and I also take requests. So whatever you guys want to see here on this horror channel, please let me know. I hope you guys enjoyed yourself. See you guys next time.